All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Town of Lexington Planning Commission work session. This board is comprised of town residents who are appointed by the town council and serve without pay. This work session is being held at Town Hall on February 18th, 2025. Work sessions are less formal meetings that allow commission members to discuss information related to town issues. Citizens are encouraged to observe these work sessions, although they do not include public hearings. The meeting will be broadcast on the Town of Lexington's YouTube channel. I am Frank Berry, the chairman of the Town of Lexington Planning Commission. Other Planning Commission members present are:
Good evening, Jared Harrelson.
Good evening, I'm Brian Amick.
Good evening, Roscoe Kaufman.
Good evening, I'm Jamie Fight.
Good evening, I'm Joe Robertson.
Good evening, I'm Betsy McCall.
All right, let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time to come together and discuss the plans and future of the town. Be with this group as we discuss that. Be with all those who are sick and all those who protect us and keep us safe. In your name we pray. Amen. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Did I miss something? Oh well. The work session will now commence. We had a dinner together, and that was great. Sully Steamers was good. It's the first time I've had it. I have to visit it more often. Our agenda item tonight we're going to discuss is the amendment to Chapter 156, the Landscape and Tree Ordinance. Ms. Jessica.
Good evening. At the January 29th work session, y'all reviewed the proposed amendments to the landscaping and tree ordinance. During that meeting, the discussion focused on ensuring the ordinance addressed maintenance concerns, site visibility, concerns regarding like street trees, and then I think we had some other discussion in there about adding some different definitions. Since that time, we held stakeholder meetings on February the 5th with home builders and land planners, landscape architects, and a variety of targeted community members, such as Dominion was present. We had members from Lexington County there as well, and public safety members were there as well. So, and I think maybe one chamber member was there. So we've taken all of that feedback from those meetings and we further redlined the proposed amendments for Planning Commission review. I did want to point out that there were a couple of different things that you brought up last meeting, and I wanted to let you know that we went back and identified where those were already existing in the ordinance. So we specifically discussed street trees and concerns about how far away from the sidewalk it was and whether it was supposed to have a barrier. I know that y'all said that at some point you thought that that was already in there. I did go back and look. 156.11.02C, which is on page 24 of the attached red line documents. It had that already in there. It was written in as 5 feet to a public sidewalk. Based off of communication with the stakeholders, staff has changed that for a recommended 8 feet. It also states in there that it had to be planted with an approved and inspected root control system in place. So that was already in our ordinance, but we did modify it briefly based off of stakeholder meetings. Also, we discussed, I think the site triangle is in there in section 156.10.01A, and then there were maintenance concerns were handled under 2 different sections, 156.09.02E and 156.10.02E. So that allows us to handle making sure that they are sticking to the approved landscape plan. It also notes that we will hold on to these approved landscape plans for eternity, so we're going to keep them forever on file so that we can reference them whenever we're out there, making sure that they are keeping the plants alive and maintaining the property as approved. From there, we talked with home builders. And I don't know, how do you want to go, do you care how we go through this, Frank? Or you just want me to take off running? Okay. So we talked with, sorry. We talked with home builders, and they said that their main concern, and after having spent time trying to implement this in language in Lexington County, that they wanted to be able to have like a decorative landscape area at the front entrance of subdivisions. They didn't want it to be completely wooded areas and then you just bam, you're at an entrance to a subdivision. So staff discussed with a couple of different landscape architects and things of that nature, adding in some language to allow them some creative ability with the understanding that it would be approved by the approving authority staff member that reviews these plans. So if you go to page 25, which is the scenic corridors under the subdivision development section, we have put in some language in here that is B, and it states, notwithstanding the standard 50-foot wide buffer requirement along scenic corridors, an entranceway landscape area may be allowed up to blank linear feet on both sides of the entrance to a subdivision, subject to the following conditions. We left that linear feet blank because we wanted you all to provide some sort of guidance on that, or recommendation, if you agree that this would be suitable to be in the ordinance. The suggestion we received from stakeholders was 100 feet from the center point of the access road of the subdivision on both sides. The purpose of the entranceway landscape area is to accommodate beautification landscape plans at the entranceway, enhancing the visual appeal and aesthetic value of the subdivision's entrance, and that it is subject to be reviewed and approved by the approving authority to ensure compatibility with the overall scenic corridor preservation goals, including the use of appropriate plant species and visual screening techniques. And then beyond that landscape area, the 50-foot scenic corridor buffer shall be maintained as per the standard scenic corridor ordinance language. Staff felt that this would be a good option to allow for some people, to make that pretty and to fit the aesthetic of Lexington, and to go along with their entranceway. Do y'all have any thoughts on that?
That's 100 feet from the center line of the new road.
That was the recommendation.
Right and left.
Right and left. And it's not a requirement, but it is an option available if the development chooses to do that.
That distance could be a couple hundred feet to a couple thousand feet.
So they still would have to put in the scenic corridor buffer, but as you got closer to the entryway, it would allow them to do a landscape area to beautify their entranceway. So it's not just wooded scenic corridor and then boom, you hit a road with a sign. It would kind of taper down into the entryway of the subdivision.
And they came up with 100 feet?
That was the suggestion that we received at the stakeholder meeting. We left it blank for you all to have discussion or provide some sort of recommendation.
I think 100 feet would be sufficient.
I'm a visual person.
Yeah, what's the average current?
So the most recent subdivision that you all approved and then it went to council was the Preserves at Cherokee Trail. I have their site plan with me because they included on there before we even had this discussion, the scenic corridor buffer. So if you look at where they have their turn lanes, and it's very tiny, so I apologize, but right there is the 50-foot mark, and then here would be an additional 50 foot. So right there is probably the 100-foot mark outside of that entrance. So for visual reasons, it was helpful for me to see that, to kind of look at that. and I'll take it down there so they can see as well. Y'all good over
So
here?
you're talking 50 feet here,
Yeah.
100 feet here, 100 feet here
Yeah.
versus this whole entire thing.
Right, so
It
that,
would be the same as a diesel lane, so 150, so.
right,
could go 150.
so
I'm just
there's,
saying, if not, you're gonna have your,
that's 50.
You should start at
That's
the
an
decel
additional
lane.
50 foot, so that right there would be 100 foot.
fine.
So they want
Yeah,
to
I'm saying it could
do
be more.
landscape areas for
If they
100
were
foot
to-
passes from the center line paths,
Well, it's not, they start,
right?
they start right.
From this-
They start right at the
From the
diesel
center
lane.
line of the, of the entrance way, so that they can beautify
So it
that
starts a little
entry.
bit before diesel.
Okay.
Does that help? I'm a visual person, so that helps me understand what they're asking.
So if the average diesel lane's 100 feet, should we do 125? So it starts right before the diesel lane would start, if we have a subdivision comes in with a diesel lane for DOT?
It's almost gonna be on a project by project basis. Really. Because you may not have 100 feet or 150 or 125 feet in one direction.
Right.
But you may have it in the other.
And that's why staff felt that it was important to allow it as a may, or like as an option that you can do, not a requirement. Because like you said, every development's different, and not every developer's gonna wanna do this, right? So,
So the May would be May, which should maybe be 125? So they want to go up to 125?
So could we do a combined? Because I remember Cherokee Trail across the street. There's like 50 feet on, looking into the subdivision on the left, but there's like 125 feet on the right.
okay,
So if we do a combined of 200 feet, you could have 75 over here and 125 over here if you don't have a property to do it equidistance.
okay.
Does that make sense?
And just a question for clarification, because I feel like this question probably would be asked. Do you want to max it out of a combined of X, but no more than X on one side? Does that make sense?
Yes. I think that's a good.
What I'm trying to,
Yeah, because otherwise they could do all 200 feet on one side.
right,
Right.
right. And do we want to leave it at the discretion of the approving authority to,
Yes, it don't need to come back to us for that.
oh,
Hold them up for
right,
that.
right, okay. So a combined of what? What's your combined linear feet?
250?
You want to do 200 or 250?
I think 200.
125. What was that?
I think 200.
200.
Okay,
Okay. Let's
And-
go with 200.
okay, and a minimum, do you want to,
Like a minimum of 50 feet.
I do a recommendation of at least 50 on one side. If it can't be achieved,
minimum, yeah,
100 on each side.
okay.
I just know you can have some subdivisions with an offset entrance.
Okay. While we're in this section, the stakeholders also discussed allowing for or providing for some language to allow for alternate compliance if the development meets certain criteria as an infill development in an area that is already built out. So their concern is that you, have a subdivision or an area that is not wooded currently, and the surrounding areas are already built out to our previous standards, and it's not wooded, they felt that it would make it stand out more to then plant a 50-foot scenic corridor buffer whenever everything around it doesn't meet that. So they asked if there were, if you know, consideration for adding language that would allow, if they met a certain criteria in a built-out area, to meet an alternate compliance. I didn't draft that language because I didn't know if there was an appetite
How
for
many
it.
scenarios or exceptions? I don't.
Or, I mean, they always have their reason to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, because the Board of Zoning Appeals hears all landscape variances.
So my personal opinion, I think we leave it the same and don't create additional language, and they can just get a variance or appeal. That's what the board's for, just so I didn't.
Okay,
So that would give them what they're asking for without creating language for one or two one-off situations.
If they can show the hardship of it, I think going to the Board of Zoning Appeals is the best route.
Okay, so then that points me to section C. In the subdivision development portion of the scenic corridor and also in the commercial scenic corridor, there is language that would allow for a reduction if the buffer zone represents greater than 20% of the area of a parcel. Do you want to allow for them to have this reduction available in the ordinance, or are you wanting them to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals to hear that out on a case-by-case basis and prove the hardship?
I think the same logic applies.
That's exactly one thing I'm trying to read it. I think it should be the same. I think that's what the zoning, that's what the
That's what the
variance board's for.
variance were for.
Okay, so we'll strike that from both the commercial section of the scenic corridor language for subdivisions and the commercial. Trying to think, we did add a definition for buffer, as you requested. That's on page 5. If y'all don't mind just glancing over that and let me know your thoughts, if that is what you were looking for.
I had a question I wrote that buffer, do we specify in the ordinance anywhere where that buffer needs to be deeded to and maintained by the HOA?
In the scenic corridor section for residential, yes, it does.
Okay.
How about commercial?
Commercial should be
They own
If
it.
this-
So it's not
should be.
subdividing it any further, so the property owner will still maintain it. It's not, it's part of their landscape plan and buffer, so.
Regardless of changing hands of ownership on that.
Right, so it's never gonna be deeded to us. It's part of the property in the site plan. Are
But
you-
speaking of HOAs, real quick, off subject, we got our road maintenance agreement back from the county, correct?
Yes, it was voted to be reinstated. I'm not sure if we've received anything written yet, but I know that they voted, and it was unanimous, I think, don't quote me on that. It was voted and approved to be reinstated.
So
Not
what would
100%
that
on the
do to
county.
the subdivisions? I think there was 2 we approved with private roads.
I know that I know that Cherokee, Preserves at Cherokee Trail stated that if the road maintenance was reinstated, that they wanted to have private roads.
Okay.
And they stated that in the planning commission meeting. What was the other one that we approved? I thought this
I
was,
thought it was 2.
we did
oh, it
not.
was
We've
one
had
that-
discussion. Y'all
Yeah.
made a recommendation and it didn't get any further than, because it
Right.
required annexation and it failed on annexation.
Right.
So
That was the other one.
that was, yeah. So that one didn't move any further. Are we good with the buffer definition?
Yep.
Does that satisfy what you were looking at? I did we did look into, I know you mentioned palmetto trees. So they technically do not classify as a canopy tree per the national standard.
Correct.
So that is why it's not considered that way. There is language in the ordinance to allow our approving authority to have the discretion to approve those in situations where it's seen appropriate.
Right, that's all.
Does that, okay,
Yeah.
all right, I just want to make
There's
sure.
situations where you have may call for the crepe myrtle,
Right,
and that would be a block of a line of sight, or it
right,
may not be the best situation.
right. We did, trying to think of all the other large things. Okay, so, on page 8, when we were discussing surface parking lot interior, so we are talking about the islands, parking islands that have a tree inside of it. So originally, staff wanted to increase this some to allow for proper root growth for the tree. We discussed this with stakeholders. there are neighboring jurisdictions around us that generally use 400 square feet as their parking island requirement. And overall, the stakeholders were fine with increasing to that number, but they did ask for relief in the number of trees per parking space to accommodate so that you didn't create a hardship with the parking requirements. So previously, we required 1 tree for every 8 parking spaces. Our recommendation is to change that to 1 tree for every 10 parking spaces, but to increase the parking island to 400 square feet to allow for that tree to have a little bit of a larger area for its root system.
Is that gonna put a hindrance on them meeting their parking space requirements?
No, because we changed the number of trees per parking space. We increased it to 10, where previously it was 8. So they're not required to have as many trees.
But we're creating an adequate environment for the trees that are being.
Correct, correct, correct.
Okay.
That way their likelihood of them surviving.
And there'll be a bigger tree.
Correct.
Do we have something in the ordinance, and again, this is maybe nitpicking, but that a species of trees, they can't grow limbs over a certain, under a certain height, because it interferes with sight distance?
That's where the approving authority has final say on materials chosen. Site distance is addressed in 15610.
That's kind of what.
01.
That's why I brought up some of the trees last time, with
Yeah.
situations like that.
And it states.
Well, if they're gonna put an oak tree out there, they need to cut the low limbs.
Well, sometimes they put a canopy tree of a crepe myrtle, and for the first 10, 15 years, you can't see the line of sights.
Yeah.
That's located on page 21, and it just states that, that you can't, no improvement requirements or regulation of this chapter shall encroach upon right-of-ways nor block site visibility triangles. So it's part of our staff's job when they're reviewing these things to take those into consideration and make sure that they're not causing an issue.
Okay.
I will also, after talking with stakeholders and talking with Lexington County, we did remove Scenic Corridor 3 from our ordinance. We were trying to align with the counties, and they had a Scenic Corridor 3 in their ordinance. After speaking with them, they actually designed that Scenic Corridor 3 to mirror our landscape ordinance at the time, because most of those Scenic Corridor 3s were following along our corridor for commercial, and so that is why they created that. We felt that Scenic Corridor 3 wasn't necessary because it was already very similar to what we already had in place. It wasn't much of a difference. So in the commercial section, there's only Scenic Corridor 1 and 2.
No need for duplication. For sure.
Page 14, I don't know if we touched on this last time, but council stated in their September work session that they wanted us to explore options for landscaping of utility access roads and subdivisions. We researched some neighboring cities with similar size and aesthetics to the town and resulted in no ordinances found regarding landscaping or paving of the utility access roads within the neighborhoods. I know that a Saluda River Club lift station at the back of the neighborhood has an access road that's constructed of stamped concrete with a grass median. We did confirm with the developer of that neighborhood that the adjacent homeowner put that in with, on their own accord because it allowed for better access to his rear yard. We did talk with our utility supervisors. They stated that when the utility access roads are paved as described above with stamped pavement and things of that nature, it's other materials other than gravel, that it is difficult to traverse, especially during certain weather conditions because of the heavy equipment that they're trying to pull through there. They would like that gravel because it provides necessary traction. And also it's not as big of a maintenance issue because that heavy equipment can bust concrete and things of that nature. And they also had concerns about heavily landscaping those roads due to who maintains, they said it just opens up some concerns. So we did ask the stakeholders, particularly land developers, if they've seen this in other jurisdictions or had success with it, and they all suggested not doing any paving of the roads, continuing with the gravel for the same reason. And they did state that if you do landscape it, it needs to be something that's not gonna grow fast and have overgrowth into the access road, because again, that causes some issues. So I don't know if y'all wanna weigh in on that?
So, we've got some, I guess, examples of that. I think millings would be a fine, I guess, as long as it's not a permanent concrete or asphalt, I guess. I think the landscaping, I think neighborhoods should be able to landscape it, because depending on somewhere these access roads sometimes are not in the back of the neighborhood. Sometimes it'll be eyesores between two pieces of property. I understand that as far as the maintenance of it, probably needs to be either the adjacent or the homeowners that occupy the property around it, or either the HOA, one of the things, but I think it can be eyesores. If not, I think they should have the ability to be able to landscape it. Not the actual road, but the...
So the lift stations themselves are already landscaped. This is specifically in regards to the road leading back to that. So there's an access road off of the subdivision road. And so the utility stations themselves have to be screened. There are requirements for that existing. I think this was in more so in the road that runs between two homes that leads back there.
I don't know of a jurisdiction that requires that.
You do not know of one? We were unsuccessful, and the stakeholders didn't have a lot of feedback other than they recommended staying away from it for maintenance reasons. But the utility stations themselves are screened. This is just the access road to get back to them. Because sometimes they're kind of tucked behind homes, but you have a road leading off of the subdivision road to it. Do y'all have any?
The only thing that, if anything, is to at least have a concrete apron off of the road.
Okay.
Because that way you don't have, if you take gravel all the way up to the back of the curb, you don't damage the curb or the road surface. You have at least 12 and a half, 13 feet.
Okay, so a concrete apron to prevent damage to the curb and the roadway.
Wouldn't be that far back, would it?
Some of them
That
tuck.
just takes it to the right of way. In most cases.
Okay.
Because they're gonna access that road several times, I know at least once a week, if not several times a week. Because I know they check those.
They do. At least I know with the lift stations, they're back there quite.
So if you
Regularly, more than you would
grass
realize.
that area where it's just a maintenance easement, if you grass that area, it's gonna get churned up, tore up. The sidewalk's gonna crack, the sidewalk's gonna break, if it's on that side, and different things. That's why I said if you take it back about to the,
Radius and all.
yep, that prevents all that.
Okay. Moving to page 16, but it starts on 15. Justification for removal of specimen or protected trees. We did add some language in there that would allow for the approving authority to grant approval of the removal of certain trees if they meet a certain criteria. And he also has the discretion of either requiring replacement for planting of those trees, but we added some language to allow him the discretion to require payment into the tree fund as outlined in section 156.10.02. So, and that's an inch for inch basis. We're in the process of creating an application for that to prove that you meet a certain criteria, and then get that payment into the tree fund. And just to note, the tree fund, those funds can only be used to plant trees in public places. So, if they can prove a hardship, if it's space constraints, or it doesn't make sense to add that many trees there, then they can pay into that fund.
Jessica, in that regard, is the approving authority the zoning board of appeals?
No,
Or is
that would be
the
staff.
Staff.
So it would, right, it would be either myself or one of my delegates. So we do have a landscape and code enforcement officer that'll be handling the plan review. And so it'll go back to him for
Okay,
that.
thank you.
So did y'all get the definition of the diameter of 4 inches from, is that consistent with like the county or
National standard.
national
yeah.
standards? That's just tiny.
Yeah.
I've heard 8 inches. I don't know if I've ever heard 4 inches before. Wow. Okay. I'm not saying it's bad. I was just wondering if we were just
Yeah,
matching something
yeah,
here, so it's
yeah.
a national. Okay.
Trying to look for any other. If y'all see anything else while I'm going through, I'm just trying to look to make sure I'm not missing anything. I kind of try to flag everything.
We won't have this back before us until March, right?
Correct. And in March, we are going to have a public hearing at the planning commission. We had kind of projected to have a recommendation to go back to council in March if y'all felt ready, but I figured we could discuss that at the end of this meeting and see how we feel.
I've got a question going to page 23.
Yep, I'm on that one. Go ahead.
Okay. Just talking about the trimming of the trees, I guess section, item 3A.
Okay.
So the 16 feet, are we, school buses, garbage trucks over the street, are we, for certain neighborhoods, we got 12 feet, except for truck thoroughfares, which shall have a clearance of 16 feet. So what's the school bus height clearance?
I'm going to be honest, I have no idea.
Because I know the school district will
We
notify
addressed
HOAs.
putting the trees back, was it 10 feet?
It's going to be 8 feet now, but it's the
From the
clearance.
back of the or back of the property line, right? So you're not gonna have, there should
Away
not
from the
be
sidewalk.
a street
But
tree.
existing trees for clearance for,
There's nothing you can do about that.
There's nothing we can do about existing.
no, I'm just
That's
stating,
not-
this is what it's stating in our ordinance. The minimum clearance of any overhead portion thereof shall be 10 feet over sidewalks, 12 feet over all streets.
I can
16.
look into it and make sure it's consistent.
I'm just saying, we might want to make sure.
Yeah, no,
we're
I have no,
considering-
I have no problem looking into it.
I mean, if it's 13 feet, well, I mean, I'm just trying to,
I know that we adjusted, and I don't remember which section it's in, but it's in regards to,
The placement of the tree, right?
we had a lot, we talked a lot with the utility companies. I mean, they sent us a good bit of information. So they requested that we change where we require a door hanger to be placed to also allow them the ability to either do a door hanger and/or send out an email or some sort of electronic messaging. We've changed that language in there to accommodate that. They said they utilize their billing system, which is something that we also do utilize to notify people as well of anything that, you know, to push out a notice. So they asked that we change that. Let's see. They talked about trophy tree clearance. And I think that they had, hang on, let me go back, it's in the utilities section. And we might not,
school bus is 9.5 to 11 feet, so 12 feet
so we'll
would,
be fine,
12 feet would be good.
yeah.
do anything about those, the town could cut them down.
Or the heights over the, so I'm just
I think
using,
they didn't want anything over under power lines to be, I think they wanted it to be less than 15 feet. And so we changed it to match what their standards are. They've also provided us with a lot of handouts that we can use when we're talking with people that have overhead power lines, so that we can tell them it's a consideration of for different plants and what they would approve underneath their power lines, and which would be good. So we can hand this out and utilize this when we are working with designers on their landscape plan, and they have an overhead power line issue. So I have that information too. But we changed that language, and I can't, of course, when I'm looking for it, I can't find it. But we changed the height that they wanted to what is consistent with what they suggest. And I want to say it was 15 feet. All right. In the subdivisions, we talked a lot with stakeholders. The landscape architects had a lot to talk about on this, and so did the home builders. Currently, with the implementation of the scenic corridors and you know, they've been doing this at the county for some time. The problem that they have is that final inspection for their landscape plan for the scenic corridors needs to happen before they can get bonded plat status. The issue with that is a lot of times they don't have the necessary resources on site at that point, such as water, electricity, and things of that nature. The home builders and the landscape architects suggested that we not require them to have the scenic corridor buffer planted until final inspection, to ensure that all of those necessary resources are on site, so that they're not planting a buffer that will then die, then to have to just be replanted. They want to make sure that when they plant it, they have everything there to help the plant survive. So they ask that we include language that approval is not needed until final inspection. Do y'all have any thoughts on that? Are y'all okay with that?
the only concern I have is I don't want a situation like we had with Bar Lake and get involved with amenities and that type of stuff. I guess, I think maybe the hardscape of the thing is already laid out, maybe not actual planning, but the.
They suggested as a way to ensure is to include the landscape numbers in their bond estimate, so that it is that we use for infrastructure, to ensure that there is monies there and that it's a guarantee. And that what they suggested was having their landscape architect give them an estimate, and then the engineer would include that in their estimate to us whenever they provide their bond for the infrastructure for the subdivision.
I just want to make sure that the citizens of the neighborhood that they're purchasing homes are, I guess, know that what they're getting.
Well, one good thing is a lot of times these are phased. In the very first phase, they don't receive final plat after all the phases are entered. They received final plat status on a phased basis. So they're bonding the infrastructure within that phase of the subdivision. So phase one is usually going to be up there at the front, right? So once they start before they can have final plat on phase one, they have to have that installed. It'll be part of that. We're already going out before we release bond, and before we give final plat recording, we're already inspecting things like sidewalk and infrastructure and things of that nature. So this would just be another thing that we would inspect at that time, and then release the bond.
I think it makes sense.
They are allowed one reduction of a bond, per our ordinance. And so if they were able to get those resources on site and get it planted earlier, they could ask to reduce that bond amount, to remove the landscape if they felt that was necessary. So
You're talking about the buffer,
the scenic corridor buffer.
scenic corridor buffer, in addition to the entrance.
Yeah,
So they may put the entrance in first and not the buffer. So they would still bond the buffer.
yeah, they would bond it, yes, everything that's on the approved landscape plan. So they would have to bond that approved landscape plan, to include an entranceway if they chose to do that. Is that fine with you all? If so, I'll add that language. We good? Yeah? Okay. I think that is most of it, unless y'all had something else that was sticking out that y'all wanted to discuss or that you had questions about.
I think I'm good.
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 Anything down there, Roscoe?
No.
From the wise?
Okay, so the timeline that we had projected for this, for you all, was to have a public hearing in the March meeting. I don't remember what date that's gonna be. I wanna say it's probably around the 18th or something like that.
19th.
Okay, so with that, do we feel, yes, the 19th. Do you feel like you need another work session to discuss it more? Do you want me to go back and clean up the things we've talked about tonight and bring you another document to review? Or do you feel like you would be comfortable making a recommendation to town council?
Can you take out all the red lines of the update and just highlight the changes you're gonna make based on what we discussed tonight and the proposed changes we made?
I will find a way.
I mean, that way, we get
can
it,
see
we can
what's
review
different.
it, we can see it, and if we
Yes.
have a question, we could
Yes.
raise it. I don't think we need another work session,
Okay.
is what I'm getting at.
So we want it on the agenda for the March meeting as a recommendation to council.
Yes.
And in that document that's included in your backup, I will take away red lines and only highlight the things we've discussed tonight that need to be changed. And we'll make a recommendation as,
Final draft.
yes.
Council, yeah.
Okay, all right. So if everybody's comfortable with that, I'm good with that as well. Okay, all right. Well, that's all I have for tonight. Unless y'all have anything else that you would like to add on the red lines.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
A motion and a second. Without objection, we adjourn. Thank you for watching the Town of Lexington Planning Commission work session. On behalf of the Town of Lexington Planning Commission and staff, I wish you a good evening.